The big showdown coming to Oxford on Saturday, Ole Miss and Georgia. And of course, the Rebels are walking that tightrope in hopes of the college football playoff. And Georgia's the one team that you need to get through in the SEC. Welcome in, everyone, to Ole Miss Rebels Live. We've done this now 9 times. Leanne is standing by. She had a few other obligations, but she'll be joining us here at some point soon. We got Ruby Dreher here as a new co-host at the Voice of College Football for Ole Miss. Ruby, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining the team.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Mark. There's nothing I love more than talking about Ole Miss. So excited to be here.
So tell us a few things about yourself, just in regards to how you became a big sports fan, college football fan, your ties to Ole Miss, and what you are currently working on and your career situation right now.
Yeah, so I'm actually originally from Las Vegas, and I only have one younger sister, and my dad was a big sports fan. So I quickly learned that if I wanted to go to all of the guys' trips in the games, I needed to be a big sports fan and love all of his teams. So I grew up a University of Utah fan, and we were talking to one of my dad's friends when I was about a freshman in high school, and he said that the best sports atmosphere he had ever been to was Ole Miss. And at that point, I had never been to Mississippi. And I just decided, like, okay, Ole Miss is for me. And my parents took me on a trip there my sophomore year of high school to show me just how far away it was from Vegas and how hard it was to get to. We ended up going to a 2016 Ole Miss versus Auburn game, and I was hooked. That was the end for me. So I haven't had to deal with a lot of the Ole Miss rough fandom. So I've been pretty lucky in the past couple of years. But I love Ole Miss, and they're really easy to talk about. I currently work for ESPN's College Game Day, which has been really fun to be able to go to tons of different schools. I was hoping we were going to be in Oxford this weekend, but I'll settle for Death Valley versus Alabama and at LSU.
It always strikes me, talking about Ole Miss, obviously, it's got all the resources, facilities of being a major college football brand and all of that, but between the Grove and the college town and everything else, it has this small community family feel to it as well. That's really cool.
For sure. I think that's what's most endearing about Ole Miss is you know, when you ask a casual college football fan, you don't really consider Ole Miss to be one of these blue blood teams that have always won in the past and are kind of guaranteed a playoff spot. But the thing that people keep coming back to with Oxford and the Grove in particular is that it's a college football destination. It's known as the best tailgating, and it wins every single year. And there's a reason for that. There's just nothing like it. And it's been a really unique experience for me to get to travel to all of these different places that I've always seen and loved. But everywhere I go, I compare him to the Grove, and I haven't found one that's better. So I'll keep you updated on that, though, Mark.
And I'm sure since you've been pretty connected to Ole Miss going back to 2016, you know that you're in a pretty fortunate situation right now, that it hasn't always been that good for Ole Miss football.
Yeah, definitely not. And I do count my blessings because I did get to skip a lot of the really early rough years, but I did deal with 4-8 2019 Matt Luke era. So while have been pretty fortunate with the Lane Kiffin era, I did have to suffer through my freshman year a little bit. So, but for sure, it's a wonderful time to be an Ole Miss fan.
At the same time, a quick thumbs up to Matt Luke. Brought this program through a really rough time, did a good job, and set things up pretty well for Lane Kiffin. But obviously, it has just been a high trajectory and taken off since then. All right. Ole Miss taking on Georgia, of course, coming up on Saturday, 3:30 Eastern. And so before we bring on our guest, let's talk a little Arkansas football. And what happened last weekend was a bit startling from the standpoint of Arkansas is no heavyweight in the SEC, but they had a really good season coming in. You know, they beat Tennessee. They've hung with everyone until Ole Miss showed up. At 63, they dropped on Arkansas. That was super impressive.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't want to discount anything about Arkansas because that's always my very least favorite game of the year. I was joking leading up to last week that I was going to do everything in my power to avoid watching that game because there's just too much trauma from it. And Arkansas always finds a way to win. And even if they don't, it's one of those games that it's so hard to watch. It's so hard to get through. It's just chaotic. Your heart's racing the entire time. And it's different than these, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia games, because it's just weird. That's the only way I can describe it as, is Arkansas versus Ole Miss is always weird. And so seeing them open up a can of whoopee on them last week was everything that I needed and more. But even with the win, I didn't think that it was going to be 63-31. And while, yes, that's a huge margin, I think that we also need to point out that, yes, they scored 31, but it wasn't until very late in the game. Ole Miss just completely obliterated them and then put in third string, and Arkansas was able to get a couple more points on the board to make it look a lot more even than it really was. So it was definitely good to see an Ole Miss team that has kind of struggled offensively. They picked it up a little bit against Oklahoma, but it was really good to see them be able to find the right people, especially, Jordan Watkins, and without their star receiver, Trey Harris. So I was happy last week for sure.
All right, folks, leave your comments and questions right here at the Voice of College Football. Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That's your time to check out Ole Miss Live. We're on a few different channels tonight, or right now, I should say. Georgia, Ole Miss, the main channel, but eventually we're moving on over to the Ole Miss channel exclusively, so please lock it in right there. We'll leave the link to the channel in the chat. All right, let's talk Georgia. Kings of the SEC. We got Matt Green stopping by, and Matt, in a similar situation. This is so exciting for me in particular. You two have no idea, because we got a new co-host here with the Ole Miss Show and a new co-host over on the Georgia channel. Matt, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, great to see you, Mark. I'm glad to be on the team.
Well, I could wear red today and be part of and not show any preference to Ole Miss or Georgia. So I'll let you two go at it. But Matt, it's great to see you. And when we get started over on the Georgia channel, you can run down some of your background and so forth. But I think people want us to dive right into the game here, so we'll do that. So how does the number 3 team in the country disappoint? That's where the standard is at this point that people are talking about. What's wrong with Georgia? Why are they not blowing teams out? Why did Florida hang around with a backup quarterback? How do you assess this football team at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all, reasonable questions to ask, 10 weeks into the season. They haven't felt like Georgia, but I think, like you said, Georgia is kind of judged through a different lens than some other programs out there. So, yeah, for Georgia, for that standard of, this should be what were they preseason number 1 team in the country, Carson Beck, preseason Heisman favorite and all that. They're 7-1, but it doesn't feel the best 7-1 right now.
Ruby, I will let you and Matt slice and dice the X's and O's, and I'll just kick back and enjoy from here.
One thing that I want to point out when you say that is something that I always think about with Georgia and Alabama in particular is the mark of a good team is when you can finish the games and win the games you're supposed to. And I think that's one thing about Georgia is, yes, they are coming off of a loss to Alabama, but that was a game that they weren't favored to win, and it was tough. And at the time, Alabama looked like the team to beat. And the thing that I'm really looking forward to seeing this week is, can Ole Miss find a way to win this game? Because we saw them lose against Kentucky in a game that they should have beat. They shouldn't lose at home. They're not a team that really does lose at home. Is this one of those situations where which team is going to be able to come out and, finish the fourth quarter? Because I don't think the game's going to be over before that final whistle.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I think from a Georgia perspective, every week we get away from that Alabama game, we're just wondering, what team did Georgia play that day? Because we have not seen that Alabama team. Like, what has been 5-6 games in a row now? They've just barely beaten teams, and the offense has not looked good. Like, I had my criticisms of Jalen Milroe coming into the season, and halftime of that Georgia game, I'm like, okay, I was wrong. This is the best player in college football. And then ever since then, we've seen that Alabama offense struggle. So I think one thing that's interesting that I feel like everyone's talking about right now, obviously, is, Carson Beck and his struggles, 11 interceptions in the last 5 games. But one thing I find interesting is, so Carson Beck, he's definitely struggled. Don't get me wrong. Like he has regressed, but in a lot of these games, like you're talking about finishing at the end, Like when Texas had all the momentum after the fans were throwing everything on the field and they cut that game to a touchdown, it came down to a 3rd and long on that next possession deep in Georgia territory. And Beck was able to complete that big 3rd down pass to Arian Smith. And then Georgia, I think it was like an 89-yard drive they went on to kind of, exhale and take control of that game. And then you kind of saw a similar thing in the Florida game. Despite his struggles with the 3 interceptions, late in the game on that, when the game was 2020, he found his man Arian Smith, who most Georgia fans didn't think was going to be our number 1 receiver coming in this season, but he really has been that most consistent receiver. So despite Beck's struggles, I think you heard Kirby Smart say at the press conference at the last game, like, we're not going to stop throwing. Like, this team can't really run the ball well, and the passing game has been the strength of the offense. So you're going to kind of go down with the ship of Carson Beck, for lack of a better term.
Absolutely. And that's such a credit to Kirby Smart as well. He's a coach who can get it done. And I think that's where a lot of Ole Miss fans are kind of looking for Kiffin to take that next step of, yes, he can get to 10 wins. Yes, he, is a great offensive mind, but can he get to the point where he wins those big games that are tough or aren't going his way, and finish them out? So it'll be a good one.
Okay, now I am truly surrounded by football knowledge on all sides. So great to have Leanne here. As always, Leanne Herring and I have co-hosted this show, let's see, for 9 weeks now. So Leanne's been here. We got Ruby and Leanne tag teaming the Ole Miss show going forward. So Leanne, good to see you as always.
Thanks, guys. Sorry I'm a little late to the party. Was talking Georgia football and a little, Ole Miss, a big game battle in the trenches, so y'all can fill me in. I know Ruby just made a great point about, Lane, the biggest win since he's been here. This is going to be a crucial game on so many fronts. Obviously, for us, it's a playoff berth. It's an opportunity to keep the dream alive. Going against Kirby Smarts, who undoubtedly is, blue collar, grit kind of guy, mentally always gets his guys in the game. So despite the struggles that we've seen, this late in the season, and you kind of alluded to it, despite all the problems we talked about with Carson Beck, kind of the difficulty, not having Brock Bowers, his go-to guy in that end zone, that comfortability. Kirby Smart and this Georgia Bulldog team always find a way offensively. And like I said, this is going to be a great challenge for Ole Miss. A lot of key components, and I think this is really going to be a game that's going to be won in the trenches, because you're talking about 2 defenses that are going head-to-head that have its own preakness of elite, but we also got put points on the board, and it's going to be a battle of two really good quarterbacks, and in the trenches with which offensive line can really help get a lead in aggression and keep both these quarterbacks clean in the pocket to be able to execute and put points on the board.
For sure. And I have a question from a Georgia perspective that I'm interested in. And I think, Leanne, you'll probably agree with this. Ole Miss has been looking, as soon as the schedule came out, has been looking at this Ole Miss Georgia game as this is our path to the playoff. And this has been a playoff game, just internally for what they need to do. The path to the playoffs runs through Georgia. Does Georgia feel that same way as well? Or were you more looking at the Alabama game? And this is kind of one of those games that you're supposed to win.
I would say it's not necessarily you're supposed to win this, because this is definitely one of the games I circled as a Georgia fan. But I think right now, Georgia, they're sitting at like the number 1 strength of schedule in the country, right? So I don't think you could circle one game. But yeah, I would say before the season started, it was definitely at Alabama and at Texas. So Ole Miss took the 3rd seat there, but that's still a pretty high seat behind Alabama and Texas.
For sure. I'll take that as an Ole Miss fan.
One thing that was that Leanne brought up that I found that kind of led me to one of my points. What I find interesting about this game, this is probably the first Georgia game of the season where the opponent feels like the team under more pressure. Like with Kirby Smart teams, they're just kind of always the one under pressure. Like we had to live with the 1980 stuff for I don't know how long. You couldn't get excited about any season because then the rival fans talk about 1980. Like this right now, we went to that Alabama game with this is Alabama's Georgia's daddy, right? And Kalen DeBoer is the new coach. You can't let the new guy come in and beat you after Saban's dominated you for so long. And unfortunately they did. And the same with Texas. Texas was kind of the new kings of the SEC kind of being anointed. And Georgia was the one that kind of that was under the pressure to step up to that the table. So with Lane Kiffin and his reputation in big games versus top 25 versus top 10 teams, And like you said, with the 2 losses they already have, this is Ole Miss's season on the line on Saturday.
Oh, undoubtedly, and you brought up a really good point. I don't know if you guys touch on this. As far as what do you think the Georgia game plan is going to be here? Do you think they get aggressive early? Try to take some shots against the secondary. Where do you think that Kirby Smart? I mean, because Kirby Smart is just meticulous in being able to break down a team. I mean, and he's one of the best coaches at adapting and adjusting. Ole Miss has adapted and adjusted, but against Kirby Smart and that coaching staff, that's going to be a real difficulty. So how do you think Georgia approaches this game to be able to control this game early? Because it's going to be a close one. I mean, Vegas has it 2.5, 2-point spread. So, I mean, this is a close one. So clearly they're giving credit where credit is due. But like I said, Kirby Smart comes in here and that staff, I mean, they played in big impact games where, like Ruby mentioned, Lane Kiffin's has not played in these kind of games with this kind of team. So what kind of approach do you think Georgia takes to be able to take control of this game earlier? How do you see Kirby Smart calls this game, and where are they going to, try to capitalize on Ole Miss strengths and weaknesses?
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how this defense plays, because you've seen now, because I think that's Georgia's biggest advantage coming to this game is they are battle tested with going on the road at Alabama, going on the road at Texas. And you saw 2 very different games take place, and the difference was the defense. You saw Carson Beck throw 3 interceptions in both games. One of them you were down 28-0 at one point. The other one you basically dominated for 4 quarters. So Texas made it close, but I think with how just dominant Georgia's team was defensively in that performance, like that gave you a lot of confidence. But at the same time, that defensive performance versus Texas kind of feels like the outlier. So I don't think we've seen Georgia look like 2021, 2022 Georgia defense most of the season, except for that game versus Texas. But I think like we were kind of alluding to earlier, Georgia wants to be able to run the ball. That's what Kirby Smart, that's where kind of he's, his philosophy, but they just haven't. The Texas game is probably the best they ran the ball this year, and Etienne had a big game, and he left the Florida game, and I think is questionable, but I think he's likely to play, but he's dealing with a rib injury right now. So Georgia wants to run the ball, but I think they've kind of accepted the fact that the Carson Beck in this offense, that's how they're going to be the most explosive. So we've seen Ole Miss's secondary at times give up some big plays. I think that's probably the way Georgia's still going to have to, live or die with Carson Beck.
One of the things that you brought up that's so important is, and I also a little bit of trauma as an Ole Miss fan, is it seems to be that these really good teams who have had problems, in this circumstance, Georgia's running game, they tend to figure it out against Ole Miss. And I'm hoping in this situation that isn't the case, but I think on Ole Miss's path to victory is going to be continuing to stop the run and containing Trevor Etienne, because if he gets going, and obviously the other offensive weapons that Georgia has, it's going to be a really long night for an otherwise really good Ole Miss defense that has played very well and has the players who can make the big plays. And especially with Carson Beck's interceptions this year, I think it's all really going to depend on Ole Miss's defensive line.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think there's this narrative, I think, about Georgia that we kind of don't know what Georgia team we're getting week in and week out. I found it interesting, and I think a lot of it's based on Carson Beck, because the interceptions, you can lose to anybody if your quarterback's throwing 3 interceptions, but Georgia's actually scored between 30 and 41 points 5 weeks in a row. They're actually the only team in the SEC that has 5 30-point games in conference play this year. No one else actually. I think Ole Miss only has 1 30-point game in conference this year. So, and it was they doubled up. It was 60 they just put on Arkansas, and that kind of makes Ole Miss's offense look a little better than I think it has in the first few weeks, because they have the number 1 scoring offense in the SEC when you just look at against SEC competition, but they were 11th coming into last week for that Arkansas game. So there's been as good as Lane Kiffin's offenses typically are, I'm not sure if this is which Ole Miss, if we're getting an elite offense, if we're getting the kind of the one that scored 17 points against Kentucky. I'm not sure that exact score off the top of my head.
13-12, right? Was it 13?
Oh, that was Georgia. Georgia did only score 13 against Kentucky.
I thought you were
that's
talking
fair.
about the Georgia game.
That was
17, something like that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody
Yeah,
expected
2017 was the
Kentucky to bring
Kentucky
in that.
game.
Yeah, nobody expected Kentucky to play so well against us, or keep it close against so many teams. But again, defenses seem to be the storyline, and I think we've all kind of alluded to it, that it's going to be a game in the trenches. Like I said, these offensive lines are going head to head. Ole Miss offensive line hasn't done the best job, but they've done a lot better job, protecting and this time for Jackson Dart to be able to operate. But again, I think like we've all said, I think it's going to be a close one in a game in the trenches, no doubt.
If I could cut in real quick, what I find intriguing about these kind of matchups is you've got the established power. You've got the Alabama, Ohio State, and now Georgia's joined pretty much 2 or 3 programs in the country at that status. And then you've got Ole Miss. They're fun to watch. They got speed, athleticism. They got the quarterback, and they show glimpses of, and obviously their trajectory has been like this. Well, they matched up on a Saturday night last year, and I walked away from that game thinking, okay, I think Ole Miss has the skill position players. They got the speed. They got the quarterback. But man, just she got punched in the mouth over and over again. They could not stand up in the trenches, and that's where Georgia has separated themselves in the last 7 or 8 years, and it showed again in that game.
Absolutely. And Kiffin even left that game talking about we need to get bigger and better in the trenches. And that was a huge priority, I think, after getting, frankly, really embarrassed in what a game that was supposed to be good. And it was over by halftime. So I'm hoping that, I think on paper, Georgia still takes the edge off of roster, but I think Ole Miss now can compete, especially on the defensive front. Offensive line, as Leanne said, we've struggled a little bit, but getting better. I think Georgia's going to be the real test to see how much they can hold up. But yeah.
Ruby and Matt, we know you need to run. So
Yeah.
Ruby, give us what an Ole Miss win looks like.
Okay. I think the biggest path to an Ole Miss victory is you got to score early, and Jackson needs to not force balls. And I think that Kiffin needs to be really smart to not throw deep balls into that Georgia secondary, because I don't think they're going to win using that tactic. But like we saw in Arkansas, those intermediate, middle range, like 10 to 19 yards. If Trey Harris is back, spreading the wealth to Caden Prescorn, Daquan Wright, Caden Lee, Jordan Watkins. If you continue to spread that out and get those middle range passes, I think that's going to be the path to victory for Ole Miss.
Ruby, great to have you here. You have a great rest of your day. We're going to see a lot of Ruby here on the Ole Miss Live show each and every week. Good
Thanks,
to see you,
guys.
Ruby.
Howdy,
Enjoy the
toddy.
game.
Meeting you, Ruby.
Hi, Patty.
And real quick, Matt, before we let you go, in a sense, the same question, although with Georgia, it's kind of like just do what you do 99% of the time, I guess. But there has been, as you've addressed, those games where they've just kind of been dragged down by the opposition of Florida, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. So I'm sure that there is a lot of talk about what needs to be cleaned up for this team to reach its goals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and a lot of it is going to come down to Carson Beck. Like, if your quarterback's throwing 3 interceptions, like I said, like, you can lose to just about anybody. The interesting part is that they're actually averaging more points per game in the games that he's thrown 3 interceptions. They're averaging 34 points per game in those, and 31 points per game in the rest of it. So go figure that. I can't make any sense of that. A lot is made of, like, the absence of Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey. But if you remember, Bowers missed 3-4 games last year. McConkey missed 4 or 5. So we saw this offense, work really well with those guys kind of missing a few games here or there due to injury. So I tend to think if Georgia, if Beck doesn't throw any interceptions and Georgia takes care of the ball, they can win this game, fairly easily. But if you're turning the ball over in a hostile environment, given the opponent's short fields, anything can happen. But I would say the fact that you've been able to survive the turnovers against a team like Texas, it's got to make you feel good about beating a team like Ole Miss, even if you are beating yourselves at times.
Matt, once again, it's great to have you here at the Voice of College Football, and everyone, you will see Matt over on the Georgia channel. So just stay tuned for dates and times and all that good stuff. But Matt, it's great to see you. And of course, we're looking for a great game on Saturday.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
All right. That was Matt Green, and he's going to be hosting on the Georgia channel. And this was my first opportunity to talk to Matt, do anything live or recorded with Matt, and also with Ruby. So that's great to see. Leanne, how you doing today?
Doing good, doing good. My Golden was here trying to chime in. I think he's just as ready for this Georgia game as we all are. Talk about it. I know you guys were talking about it, and I kind of jumped late into the party, but I think that we all have kind of agreed that this is going to be a close one. This is going to be a test for both teams. Both teams, of course, offensively, kind of battered up and banged at the running back. But again, it's going to have to be, I think, to a lot of playmakers that are really going to have to step up. But again, which team are we going to get? This is another storyline that we're talking about in a game of such intensity, where we know that we're deep in the season. There's injuries, there's plague, but what team is going to be able to have the better performance? You're talking about Kirby Smart, a Georgia Bulldog team. This may not be the Georgia Bulldog team on both sides of the ball that we've seen in past years. But, that's a storyline every year. A new team, new progress. But one thing about Georgia and Kirby Smart, no matter what team is under his belt, no matter what cast of characters he's got on that field, the one thing, like I said, and I'm going to say it over again, they're battle tested. I think we've said that. They know how to win in these game situations. Not that Ole Miss hasn't been able to, but I don't think we've been on this kind of stage in a really long time. We've said it. We have the capability. We have the assets. This is probably one of the best teams, if not the best team that we have to make a run on it. And it's going to be tested, on Saturday. I wish it was an evening game, but heck, I'll take this afternoon game because nonetheless. But again, it's going to be a close one. And I think with this game, with kind of intensity, we've already talked about it. It's going to be a battle in the trenches off the elite when you have two elite SEC defenses going ahead again. It's going to be about, which offense. I think, another storyline that, for both of you, which offensive line is going to play better in this one. As much as we say about the defensive front, it's going to be an offensive line, because I'll say it over and over again, for Carson Beck or Jackson Dart to be able to execute and be able to control this game early on. And we know that both these teams are dying to get that run game going, because I think as much as we've seen, and Ruby kind of alluded to it, I don't want to put Jackson Dart with the deep ball in the end zone in this kind of game, because like we said, that Georgia defense in that secondary is going to be all over it. I like what they did, the approach that they did, that we saw in Arkansas. So I think too, it's going to be which O-line plays better in this one, which O-line is going to set their quarterback up for better and keep them clean in the pocket and allow them to execute, and I think, like I said, with the intensity of this game, it's going to come down to a lot. And another key thing that, we talk about, third down conversions and how we do. But I think, another key component in this one, Mark, is going to be winning the first downs. Like I said, we saw an aggressive Ole Miss team. Jackson Dart really seemed to turn a new leaf in that Arkansas game. I think that they really controlled, and there was this newfound sense of we need to take charge. We have to play ball like we're down, and I think we're going to have to do that, except on overdrive. But again, it's going to come down to winning the first downs. I think when you have two defenses like this, you do not want to get in third and long. You don't want to get in predictable downs with this kind of defense, because they're going to eat it all up. Kirby Smart's going to dissect it, and take it to the house. And you cannot get into predictable downs. And I think that what we're going to have to do there is you need to put them in third and threes and so forth. But I think whoever wins in the red zone and whoever is able to win with the first down and get some conversions and not cause turnovers and things like that, I think it's gonna be a close game. I mean, we can go and we can see the writing on the wall, but I think the biggest obstacle outside the obvious football skill set for this Ole Miss team is playing clean and not letting themselves get too far ahead in this game, in a sense of, they got to take 1 foot forward and they have to control this game and be aggressive.
Disputed National Champions, folks. That's my new book. It's a look at college football in the 1990s, but this is not a history book. So first and foremost, we go through all the seasons of the 1990s and break it down from top to bottom, all the situations, all the scenarios. But what it is it chronicles how that decade changed college football and the way the championship is played out today. And so it takes all these seasons and breaks them down in light of the BCS era, the 4-team college football playoff era, the 12-team that we have now, and even looking forward to what's been proposed, and that's a 14-team playoff. So the links in the description section of this video and all the videos here at the Voice of College Football. So please check it out, or you can just look up Disputed National Champions on Amazon. All right. And you took a recruiting trip this past weekend, correct? Who did you check in on?
Yeah, this past week we went not too far from home here out in the Alamo City, believe it or not, out in the south side of San Antonio. We're actually going to look at a young rising defensive player, Braden Booth. Unfortunately, when we got there, he had previous game dislocated shoulder, so he's out for the season. But we're really praying for him and all sorts of things. We'll be keeping up with him off season, but. Like any game, when you go, you get to see a lot of diamonds in the rough. And man, there was some kids there. There was a running back that was shorter than me, couldn't be taller than 5'5", I think. But he went in for 5 or 6 touchdowns. And there was just, talk about explosive. And that's what you see when you go to small schools like that and you see the run game, at the high school level, and running backs, are such and it just makes you appreciate the position of a running back and how crucial that they play in big games like this. We're talking, we're in Texas already, so we're getting ready. District play is already, wrapping up. Everyone's trying to nail their last bits in the playoffs. So, there's a lot of promising kids. Saw a 6'5" tight end, Cash Winters, if that's not a tight end name, if I haven't seen it, with a lot of really young talent, and another a 2026 kid, wide receiver, wide out. There was just, when you watch warm up and you watch how these kids execute, I always go watch their feet and their hands and their footwork, especially at the wide out position. And there was just a gut feeling when I watched this kid, and they wouldn't get him the ball, but as soon as they got him the ball, it didn't take too long for him to get in the end zone. So it was not the kid I was going to see, but nonetheless, I found 3 diamonds in the rough, and even if they don't come to, even if Ole Miss doesn't have their eyes on them, I believe that there's a lot of kids out there that a lot of Texas universities are definitely look on at. So that's exciting. Of course, I'll be heading to Oxford. I'll be making the drive tomorrow afternoon. So really excited. There's a lot of recruits we'll be catching up with and everything. They're already heading into town. It's going to be another, as far as recruiting. So there won't be a game of the week because all the recruits will be, a big stage, a lot of commits coming in town. Mark, like I said, this is along with this being a crucial game, as far as the bigger scope of things, playoff pictures, it's always a crucial game on the recruiting trail. We're just 4 weekends away from early signing day. And while this is not, there'll still be, the traditional signing day. But again, we say that day in December is, of course, is where you're going to get your meat and potatoes, the bulk of your kids, and trying to flip some. Of course, I think one of the biggest recruiting storyline is Caleb Cunningham, Alabama commit, but he's also 5-star wide receiver. He's also a hometown in-state kid from Choctaw County, here in Mississippi. He's coming back this weekend. I think that's just while he's still committed to Alabama, he's been here back-to-back weekends, and I think that's going to be another crucial flip. So there could be a flip watch coming soon. So like I said, as far as the recruiting front, Lane Kiffin has a lot of playmakers coming in. A lot of commits coming in, so it's going to be big on the recruiting trail, and we're going to be, talk with them. So hopefully on the post game show, we'll be talking some upset and victory quotes. But nonetheless, a big game this weekend. Of course, CFP polls came out yesterday. I think what did the Rebels fall at 16? So hey, I didn't expect us to be much higher than that. I think that going into this with the 2 lost teams and the way when you got undefeated, like Indiana or other places, you can't help, you can argue the strength of schedule and all that all day. But again, when you got undefeated teams against 2 lost teams, I expected Ole Miss to be where they are. But I think, again, this game sets the stage a lot for Ole Miss on many regards. So I don't know what your take was on that CFP poll, because you always are really good about, after all the polls come out, what it should like or what he could look like, and I don't, but I think we felt right where I believe we should be. We still got a lot of work to do, but I think Georgia, of course, is the key component in the path to the playoff, like Ruby mentioned, and everyone's kind of mentioned as far as the Ole Miss fan base goes.
Yeah, we did a watch party while the playoff rankings were being revealed, as we always do. And my initial reaction was, in addition to going through, we combed through every conference, everybody's schedule, and the various paths and situations. As it lines up for Ole Miss, it's very clear cut. They've got to get through Georgia. They've got to get through the rest of their schedule. If they are a 10-2 SEC team with an overtime loss to LSU, with a win against Georgia, with the quality of play that they've thrown on the field, they're in the playoff. If they drop a game, it's practically impossible for them to make the playoffs. It's just that cut and dry for them. For all sorts of other teams, there are all sorts of crazy situations and things that are outside their control. But for Ole Miss, it's all right in front of them.
No doubt. And like I said, I mean, there's just so many implications on this game. And I think, again, we know that Kirby Smart's been here time and time again. No, like I said, no matter what Georgia team he brings in, and no matter how as elite or not elite as they were as the previous team, the one thing is they answered well under pressure. And Kirby Smart is a blue collar kind of guy, roll up your sleeves. His energy feeds off his team and it translates on the field, no doubt. And like I said, Kirby Smart's one of those guys that can adapt and adjust and play time really well. Ole Miss has been able to do that. But again, we have to play like how we did on the road against Arkansas, being able to adapt and adjust as far as 4 quarters of football. But like you said, this is a game that we have to win, and we have to win at Florida. We have to, win against Mississippi State. So I do believe that if we have, this is like a do or die kind of situation as far as the playoffs. I mean, obviously there's bowls, and that dream is still alive. But I think everyone's at that expectation. We've given Lane Kiffin, time to build, and he's done a heck of a job. No credit to that. What he's done and what he's gone out there and recruited. I mean, this is an elite Ole Miss team. Yes, it's had its moments, but again, we can't say it enough. And I get it that we didn't get that win against Kentucky at home. We didn't get that road win against LSU like we needed. But again, that was not a blowout win. That was one playoff away. And, who shoulda, woulda, coulda. But at the end of the day, this is an elite team that Ole Miss has had. This is, like I said, one of the best teams we're bringing into the situation. Now the question is, can they answer the call? Can Lane Kiffin obviously call one of the best games of his life, and along with his staff, but can they play four quarters of football with one of the best teams in the country that's been here? Ole Miss has knocked on the door, but they haven't been here as much as Georgia is. So can they handle the pressure? We talk about the physicality. We talk about, we break down the skill positions on offense and defense. But again, this is a game where there's going to be a lot of intensity. So a lot of variables bringing it into this. Can Ole Miss finally cope under the pressure and not put itself in a situation where they're going to get into penalties, where they're going to start turning over the ball? Well, that's why, I agree with what Ruby said there. I've talked about it. The ball distribution, for me, getting into a lot of guys. Would I love to see Trey Harris back? Of course I want to see Trey Harris back. But again, my biggest thing with having that is if we base our offense on one go-to guy, even one star player. Like last week was a perfect example. Jordan Watkins set all sorts of records. He was the go-to guy, but he was not the only guy. And that's my biggest thing. I think people say, they kind of misread it when I say, we got to be able to operate with or with Trey Harris. We know he's talented, but we got to be able to distribute that ball, because when we distribute that ball, that's when we can keep defenses like Georgia on our toes. And we haven't faced a defense like Georgia. So we're going to have to keep them guessing. And if we just give it to one guy, or the defense has so much pressure, like what we saw in Kentucky. Kentucky did a really good job of pressuring us up front when Jackson Dart only go-to guy was Trey Harris, and Trey Harris was able to make things happen. But we don't want it to be the same case. And that's what I said. We got too many playmakers. I mean, we went out there and we recruited top talent from the portal. We recruited top talent from, the high school. And why not use these guys? Because like I said, when everybody has got the opportunity, when we've had different go-to guys, even when Jordan Watkins has a day, everybody could eat too. And I think that's the strongest point that I can say for Ole Miss. When we've allowed our offense and Jackson Dart to be able to operate, it's when, like I said, number one, that offensive line does a great job of protecting Jackson Dart and letting him do what he does. They don't have to be elite. They just got to be consistent, and they got to leave him clean in the pocket. And second, for Jackson Dart to be able to get what he doesn't need to have one go-to guys. We got so many go-to guys, so utilize them. Why let them sit there and just, take up space on that bench Well, we know because we've seen it. It's not like, it's not like it's something out of the norm. That's why I'm such a, and we're going to have to get the run game going. I think both these teams, no question that, Matt was talking about it too. The run game is something that both these teams have struggled in. But in a game like this, we're not going to be able to take it to the air. When you got two defenses like that, just waiting to make, a turnover, cause an interception. We've seen it. I mean, look at what Ole Miss did in Arkansas right off the bat, the defensive touchdown right there. So when you're talking about, if you're going to have that in that type of game, and then, I mean, you bring Georgia to town, I mean, there's going to be all sorts of emotions. So we're going to have to, again, control our emotions on this one because, this is a game where emotions are going to get the best of you. And we know that in certain situations that Ole Miss hasn't always been the best of being able to control that. And we get into penalties, we make unnecessary mistakes. And again, Vegas agrees. We all agree this is going to be a tight game. So, points are going to be far to get in this one. So we're going to really have to open up things. But again, it's going to be a close one. But I think that Ole Miss, if they can continue to play with this aggression that they've been playing with and that ball distribution, that I think we pull off the upset. And Lane Kiffin finally shows that he can win in big games because we know what kind of coach Lane Kiffin is. If we didn't know what kind of coach Lane Kiffin and his ability and what he can do, what his staff can do, then we would have never hired him. We would never invest in. But now it's time for the investment to show if it's paid off. And I think we've knocked on the door, and I think it's finally time that we're unlocking the key and time to get in there. And I think that we have the ability and capability. Now we just got to make everything that they've worked up to at this point and play complete and play clean.
Folks, you might be watching on the Ole Miss channel. You might be watching on the main channel, or today only watching on the Georgia channel. And we do that every time there's a matchup between two teams. So the deal is that we want you to be watching on the Ole Miss channel. So please like and subscribe over there. And we've left the link there in the chat. So please join us on the Ole Miss channel. And you will see us every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And then post-game with Leanne and myself after the Rebels and the Dogs get it on Saturday afternoon. So after the ball game with Leanne and myself for Ole Miss post game, and again every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Leanne, you mentioned about the college football playoff rankings, and when you look at each of the four major conferences, they're all so different in how they're set up. So Big 12 ACC, you almost need to win the conference to make the playoff. The way it's set up right now, the way the rankings lay out, only the champions are in the top 12. Now, that could change if, like, a Miami loses the ACC championship game. They may still get a spot. So there are possibilities of exceptions. But basically, they're one-and-done leagues. And then you look at the Big Ten, and you've got Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, Penn State, and unless one of those teams collapses, they're going to make the playoffs. But they all have 0 or 1 loss. There's nobody in the Big Ten that has 2 losses, and then everybody else has at least 3 losses. So they're done. So there's just this clear cut, those teams. The SEC has 8 teams with 1 or 2 losses. It's crazy. We're going to pull up the games for this week. And so keep in mind, everyone, that there are more important games being played in the SEC than anywhere in the country, because even Missouri, like, do any of us think that Missouri's a college football playoff team? Probably not. They haven't looked that good, but still, they got 2 losses. If they went out and they're 10-2 in the SEC.
And talk about Vandy. I always said it. Vandy always comes. They are not the football powerhouse, but they are really good at spoiling people's parties. And they've definitely done that this season. So like I said, there's a lot. Before we get on this one, you mentioned the Big 12. Talk about Colorado. I mean, they were sure happy. I'm sure Deion Sanders talk of the year. Colorado making its way back up the thing in the Big 12, and I'm sure they're loving Houston right now for pulling off that upset against K-State. So again, like you said, everybody's clear-cut path, but we're here at the SEC, in a tough situation because, like you said, there's 1-2 loss teams. So yep, we got a big weekend, of course, in the SEC. It's a do or die weekend.
So besides the obvious one that we've been talking about for the last hour, what jumps out to you?
Well, I think just the quirky game that you got to look about South Carolina and Vanderbilt, because South Carolina has had its share and played its spoiler. I mean, look what they did to Texas A&M, and all that. And then, like I said, Vanderbilt has been spoiler parties. That's an interesting game to me. I haven't looked at the spread on that one, but that's going to be just like, that's my weird SEC game of the week, because you got two really weird teams that just have not been traditional powerhouses, obviously in the SEC, but man, they've shook up the SEC this season. So I like South Carolina to go on the road on this one, but man, that's one that it's just going to be my weird SEC game of the week. Obviously, I think the one that everybody talk about as far as SEC traditional rivalries is Alabama LSU. Two teams, especially Alabama, trying to settle in, and try to find its identity. Obviously, has had its struggles. It's not used to probably being this low in the rankings as far as number 11 for this long, and having other teams ahead of them. That's going to be an interesting game for me. I don't know what the point spread is. I like LSU in this one. I like LSU at home. It's just a tough place to play, and there you go. Let's see how it's going to be in Baton Rouge. It's a close one, and Alabama's still the favorite. Then I'm definitely going to take LSU on this one. I think this is a heated rivalry game. I think it's going to come in. Both these teams are trying to prove with redemption, but I think LSU at home is just a tough place to play. I mean, we saw it. It's going to be a down to the wire game. I like LSU in this one. You got to talk about, of course, that Florida Texas game. It's going to be unusual. I think Texas, there's been that back and forth talk about, is Texas back? Texas really good? I mean, Texas has proven itself. I mean, obviously Florida, the loss of DJ Lagway, I guess they were down to their third string quarterback, an XEL quarterback of all quarterbacks, who did a pretty decent job filling in for DJ Lagway's shoes. Florida's had struggle all season on the off fields and everything. I think that's going to be another interesting game. I think Texas comes home with this win. I think just because the Florida struggles, Napier talked about DJ Lagway, that they don't believe that his injury as far serious as they originally thought. So they hope to have him back. I don't think he'll be in for a Texas game, but they're hoping to have him back for the big games, obviously against Ole Miss, and to finish out the season, which like I said, DJ Lagway has helped Florida change their dynamic offensively. But like I said, got to give it to that Yale string quarterback who helped keep Florida in. So again, this is one of those weekends in the SEC, like you said, that there's a lot riding on it, and it's interesting the matchups that you see. Alabama, LSU going two longtime SEC rivals going foe to try to keep their hopes alive. But like I said, this Georgia Ole Miss game, I think, is by far the headliner as far as what's on the line here, between number 3 going against number 16 in the country, and Ole Miss is, like I said, is this finally the time where, like I said, Georgia's no stranger to this. Georgia's used to being here, but Ole Miss has been knocking on this door. The question is, they got the elite defense. They have an offense. It's unquestionably one of the best in the country on so many fronts. Now, with all this, can they take these assets that they've helped develop, and can they finally knock off Georgia? Can they have redemption? Because I know, and Ruby made a good point when she talked about it. I think that and you said it too, when we got mauled and we got just dismantled in Athens last year, I really do believe that was kind of the light turning off. And I think that was the turning point for the team that we see now. I think that that's the time when Kiff and his staff really realized that we needed to go out there. We needed to go recruit some big guys. We needed to win games in the trenches, because I think the best teams that we've seen that really have made the haul traditionally, historically in the SEC are teams that have strong front guys. They don't get enough love. The big guys up front, offensively and defensively, they don't get enough love. But again, for defenses to be able to execute the way they need to, for offenses to be able to execute, it starts with that front seven. And I think that Georgia game was a huge turning point. I think was an eye opener for Lane Kiffin and his staff. Like, hey, we got a problem here. We need to go out there. We need to fix this problem. And that's exactly what he did. He went out and got Walter Nolan. He got Princely. And he got a guy. So now we got all the tools. We got all the assets. Now can we finally close? Can we finally take one of the best teams probably in Ole Miss history, and can we finally beat Georgia? Can we get redemption? I think Ole Miss has had its back against the wall for so long. And I think for Ole Miss fans, when we see the losses, we're like, here we go again. We're not going to win. We're not going to finish. But I think that the mentality we saw against Arkansas since 2008, we hadn't won there, and we went in there. But I think our mindset going into that game, and what I observed and we talked about on the post game show, was just it was just really simple. It was just playing aggressively, playing clean, and playing 4 quarters of football. Do you have to have eliteness on every aspect and every position? No, you don't have to do it, but you just have to be consistent. But it's going to be a battle of two defenses, and I really do believe that the offensive line for Ole Miss is going to be key here. Because again, I think, I talked about winning on first downs, the O-line play, but of course, points are going to be hard to get in this game. And I think that whoever can win in the red zone, I mean, we've seen Ole Miss have so many successful drives, but, field goals aren't going to win into this one, Mark. It's not going to be, we're going to have to take gambles. We're going to have to execute. Lane's going to have to be a gambler in this one and go on 4th and down. But again, he's going to have to outsmart Kirby Smart, who is probably one of the best at playing in these situations and adapting and adjusting and rolling up the sleeves. Georgia's one of those comeback teams, and they've proved it that they can come back. Ole Miss doesn't need to play comeback ball. We've done it, but not against a team like Georgia. So again, I think we have to seize every opportunity. I mean, it's nothing more than I haven't been saying. But again, everybody's got to do their job. Offensively, it's going to start with that offensive line. If we want Jackson Dart to execute and see the Jackson Dart that we saw in Arkansas, it's because that offensive line got it together and said, hey, we got to protect our guy, regardless of who's in there, because we know that this late in the season, we've already seen it. Injuries are going to plague us. We're going to lose it. But we can't center ourselves around guys. We're going to have to be able to adapt and adjust, and I think that's going to be key here.
Again, subscribe to the Ole Miss channel. Watch us there every Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern time with Leanne, of course. And we've got Ruby on board as well. And so please join us again Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And starting just here in the last few days, you can listen to the audio from the Ole Miss live shows on your favorite audio platform. So whether that's Google or Amazon or Apple, wherever it is, you can get the audio experience if you don't get a chance to watch us that particular week. So just look it up, Ole Miss Voice of College Football. You'll be able to find it on your favorite audio platform as well. All right, Leanne, any parting shots for everyone?
No, I think I've got on my soapbox, and like I said, it's just going to be a game in the trenches. It's going to be a really exciting game. Of course, they're forecasting rain again, so we'll see how that's going to go. That's definitely going to be interesting for the turnover game. Thank God that we have turf and we don't have to play in mud. Like I said, when I was in college and I was with Brown, we weren't lucky enough to have a turf yet. So man, I saw some really ugly, gritty games. But again, regardless of what the forecast calls for, like I said, Ole Miss is just going to have to play the game of their life, and I think they have the ability to do that, and we've seen it. I think this is finally the opportunity, and it's just about seizing opportunities and doing nothing more than what we have been doing. Now we just got to execute it on all fronts. But like I said, exciting post-game show. Hopefully we'll be talking about an Ole Miss victory. But either way, it's going to be a great post-game. So we'll see you on Saturday live from Oxford, and really excited about a great game and hotty-toddy.